Hi, I hope you can hear me over the fan. This is a brainstorming video about Genesis 7 and 8's benchmarks of days as a paradigmal calendar of time, because that's what I suspect is the point of God making these benchmarks. All right? So I'm going to go through them. The document that you see on screen you can download. It'll be in the video description. It's still in draft, but that's going to be the talking point. So I'm just going to go through it here and say what I think are the meanings, and then maybe you can come up with other ideas, whether they conflict with what I say or not, I don't care, so that we can sort of like talk this thing out. I'm not going to be able to make more videos on this time question probably until Christmas or maybe next year. I've got a heck of a lot on my plate right now. So this is going to be the last video for a while. Let's put it that way. So let's start in here. You can pull out your Bible and see what the verses are. I'm just going to go through the numbers of them. In that verse, that's the famous Genesis 7:11, which Harold Camping misused. The actual text in Hebrew, I submit to you, is a mistake. They've left out, they put the word esher in there, and it should be eshrim. Alright? And if it does, if that's the proper thing, then it will agree with the LXX, which after all is a translation of the Hebrew by the Jews. And so they might have had better Hebrew text in those days. Alright? And that's what I'm going with here, because the whole timeline fits if you do this. Okay, I'm not going to explain everything you're looking at. I'm just going to focus on the numbers. Number 57. That's real important in Psalm 90's meter, Isaiah 53's meter, Daniel 9's meter, and Paul's meter. It's also very important in the Mosaic Law. Okay, and I'm going to briefly explain what I know about this number. 57, of course, is the number of days short of the time when Noah enters the ark. And that's what I think is the precedence for the 57 days in the Mosaic Law. Now, 57 represents a number of things, so I'm just going to quickly go through it. It represents the number of days between and including the first day of Passover and Pentecost. The Jews today call that counting the Omer, and they count it wrong. Numbers 28:26 tells you that you begin the count of the Omer piggybacked on the last day of Passover, unless the last day of Passover concludes at sundown on a Friday, in which case it's another regular Sabbath, not just the Passover Sabbath. So the 57 kind of has application there. So does 56, which would be the number of days between, if you're only counting either Passover day itself or only Pentecost day itself. Those are very prominent numbers in the meter. And of course they're prominent in the Mosaic Law because they represent in two different ways. The first, as I just mentioned, the count of Passover week plus the 50 days for counting the Omer to Pentecost. Alright, the second way that they're illustrated in the law is the sum of tribulation and jubilee, which is 50 years. So, the question that we all should be asking, but it doesn't look like we have been, is why was that in the Mosaic Law to start with? And you can look in Jewish sources to find out how they consider it. Alright? They consider it to be based on the flood. And, whether they're right or not, or their account is garbled, is kind of beside the point. What is the point is that there is a precedence, and we can see it right here in the Bible text. Noah, 57, on his birthday, that's 57 days short. We know that because when he goes into the ark on the first day of the flood, it's the 27th day of the second month after his birthday. God is using Noah's birthday as the year. And especially if you look at the LXX text, you can tell that. Because it doesn't use the double definite article that it uses for official calendar. It's using a single definite article, okay, to denote that it's Moses' year. Noah's year. In other words, the 27th day after his birthday. And again, this is the LXX text. Alright? So this we have to begin back here. Now, think about that. What that means. The same thing that it means in the Mosaic Law. Jubilee and Pentecost both represent harvesting the Gentiles. Well, what's Noah? A Gentile. What's happening to Noah in the flood? He's being harvested. He's being cut apart from. He's being saved. Harvesting means all those things. You're saving the good crops and you're getting rid of the bad crops. You're cutting the good crops from the bad crops. Okay? It's the same idea. 50 represents a harvesting. Just like it does in the Mosaic Law. Between first fruits, which is piggybacked on the last day of Passover, and Pentecost, which is 50 days later. Okay? So, that precedence is right here with Noah. And the 50 is first. And so, too, you have Jubilee and the Tribulation. In that case, it's reversed. And that's exactly what we see here. In other words, Jubilee was the 50 years of harvesting the Gentiles, after which will come the 7 years of tribulation. And that's been forecast ever since Psalm 90. Okay, I suspect now, I have to prove it out yet, I suspect that's based on Jacob's years. The fact that he had to serve an extra 7 years for Rachel, he served the 7 years first. That was his tribulation. Then instead of getting Rachel, he got Leah. So he had to serve another 7 years, even though he got both women at the same time. He had to finish out the second 7 years for Rachel. Okay, and then he ends up staying a third 7 years, which I'll get to later on in this timeline. So I think Jacob's life is being illustrated here, which happens, of course, after the flood. But the 57 represents a combination of harvesting and tribulation. So what do you got? It's the same meaning as the tribulation in the Mosaic Law, except it's happening to Noah. 7 years, days, prior to getting into the boat. God says, get ready, get packing, put everybody in the boat. Okay? And the tribulation itself is a warning that has a beginning, and when it begins, you're told how to know. And you get 7 years after that. That's your first warning and your ending warning. Same pattern. And it's playing like Jubilee and Tribulation in reverse. Whereas in the calendar, it's playing first the 7 and then the 50. Why? Because Messiah is paying on Passover, and the harvesting comes after he pays. You can't harvest what hasn't been, seeded. Right? So, that accounts for why it's like this in the Noahic period. And obviously there's a parallel being drawn. In the Mosaic Law, in the way Christ dies, in the way the calendar is done in the Mosaic Law. Okay? So here we got day 1, the flood, and you can find it elsewhere, like in Peter. 1 Peter 3:18 and 19 just came to mind. How Noah illustrates salvation. The human race is basically in Noah when he gets in the boat. Alright? The human race is in Christ on the cross. The whole human race, not just the elect. Okay? Whole human race. Parallel in both cases. Christ is on the cross. He's being baptized with our sins. Noah is in the ark, which represents Christ. And the water's all around him. We are in Christ on the cross. That's the theme of Romans, Romans 8, Romans 5, and Romans 8. And Romans 6, especially Romans 6. Okay? And also Romans 9, 10, and 11. Keep elaborating on that. Alright? So then this is the entry into the ark. This is the entry, Christ on the cross, and this is Pentecost. Right here. See, because what I'm basically coming up with is that in order for this timeline to be as apt as it is, I'm basically coming up with an assumption, but it looks like it's pretty accurate, that Noah was born on what would become Passover. Okay? See, ties to Passover's day. That's an assumption. Now, historically, the Jews have assumed that Noah was born on the vernal equinox. And there's going to be a link to a book on Amazon, which goes through all of the Targums and everything showing that kind of interpretation. He just collected the Targums and the MSS on Genesis 7 and 8, and he lists, that kind of interpretation, how people interpreted the importance of the flood. Okay, but right here, and I think it's a good assumption, I'm assuming that Noah was born on what would become Passover. It's just too apt. So this ends up being what would become, and the Jews don't call it this day today, but they should, 11 and 12 of Sivan, okay, as Pentecost. They call it by different names because they're using a lunar calendar. Their lunar calendar is wrong. Every month in the Bible had 30 days except for Adar. And there's a possibility that some of them had 31. I'm still looking into that. But if it's true that it's 30, because that's using the First Chronicles 24 priestly course names and their meanings, that would be 30 days each, and then Adar just ended up getting the overage. Okay, and if you got arguments against that, let me know. But the Jewish calendar today is lunar, and it's just flat wrong. That's it, and that's understandable why it's wrong, but it's wrong. Okay, a lot of things in life are wrong. You fix it and move on. So this would be Pentecost. One way or the other, this is Pentecost. Okay? Okay, the next entry item is 40 days. And that we all know what 40 means. 40 means testing. So it's not too surprising that it's 40 days flooding coupled with rain. Now, the people who actually know the Bible realize that most of the flooding that occurred came from earthquakes or other kind of breaks in the crust from under the earth, so all the water came up and basically the subduction and everything kind of just sank for a while. And the rain, well, that was just additional. There wasn't the flooding wasn't really caused by the rain. It was just on top of the real flooding, which was caused by the subduction. And if you know anything about geology, you know that there are, as they call them, tectonic plates that are all over the globe. They sort of fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And it'd be real easy if they all shifted at the same time for that water to come shooting up and drown everybody. Okay, because basically all the continents are floating on water. So it's not too hard to understand. And in fact, the geologists are estimating that something they call Pangea was once the Earth's crust was all one unit and it didn't have those fissures in it. So at some point in the past, they assumed that those fissures occurred, and that's why the continents floated as they did. In other words, they weren't initially floating. The whole world was underwater initially. Of course, that ties to Genesis 1-2, but we won't talk about that. Let's just go on. 40 days. We all kind of know what that is, time of testing. Okay, now that's obviously represented in Israel's history. It's represented as a sort of catchphrase in the Mosaic Law, time of warning, time of judgment. A lot of the prophets, their ministries lasted 40 years. I mean, that's something that pretty much all Christendom knows and agrees on, what the 40 means. So I don't have to elaborate on that. I don't see it much used so far. I don't see it much used in Hebrew meter, but then, I've only examined like about 10 passages at most. Okay, so now we get to the next number. This is really important. 50. 150. 150 happens to be the number of sevens in a 1050 unit of time. Okay? And at this point, it's analogous. Again, I'm not sure why. I'm just saying what it is, and, later I'll understand better. 150 is the number of sevens in a 1050. Now, exactly why God's breaking it up like this, in this sequence, I don't know yet. I'm just saying what I do know. Maybe you'll figure it out. Maybe you're supposed to figure it out. And let me know so I can save me time. Alright, but 150 is the number of sevens in a 1050 unit. Alright? So then we go down here, and we're still at the same 1050. And these are by the way, these are my date estimates for the week, the meaning of the week. This is really kind of important. These are the date estimates to see if the First Chronicle 24 calendar is saying something about that week, okay, that is precedented in the flood, and it looks like it is. Okay, you'll have to analyze that yourself, but I put the names of the weeks in the calendar that correspond to these dates here, and you can decide if that's what it means. Okay, and then off here to the right, I talk about the other priestly course names for the other weeks. And you can play with that. I'm not going to cover that here. So then we come back here. We just finished talking about 150 being equal to the number of sevens in a 1050 unit. Again, why this sequence and why this significance here, I don't know. It could be something else. I'm just telling you what I do know. Again, I'm using the LXX. It's saying that it's the 27th of the 7th month, not the 17th. Okay? And again, that's a simple mistake to make. It's a plural, eshrim, rather than esher. It'd be really easy to make that mistake in copying. Alright, then the next point is 243. Okay, and that's 93 days later. Again, using the LXX, it's the 11th month, not the 10th. Now, the significance of 93 is really pretty heavy in both the Mosaic Law and Israel's history. Alright? I'm not as quickly able to say the significance of 150 in Israel's history. But obviously, the fact that there are 157s in a 1050 unit would make it important. I haven't done enough more research on what 150 might mean in the Mosaic Law to explain anything now. 93 I know a little bit more about. 93 is the sum of 60 plus 33 or 30 plus 63. Okay? And there are other numbers. Every one of the kinds of factors that go into 93 are all over Israel's history and all over Bible Hebrew meter. So if you've gotten into my Psalm 90 playlist and you've seen the meter there, you already know about this. Paul even uses combinations like this. And I mean, it's real easy for even most Christians to understand some of it. The fact that Christ died when he was 33, that's a factor in 93. The fact that Christ therefore was king of Israel for 33 years, which tallies to the 33 years that David was king of Israel when he was king over all Israel. That's in 1 Kings 2. So David ruled 33 years over all Israel and 7 extra years over just Hebron and Judah. Okay? So those kinds of ties, and of course the 40 years back here, also happens to be a very common ruling number. Joseph is vizier. He was a vizier for 80 years. So that's 2 40s. The 40s are always paired, and you're going to see that here too in Noah's calendar. The number of years that Saul ruled, which you don't find out until Paul talks about it in Acts 13. It's deleted from 1 Samuel 13. Number of years that David ruled, the number of years that Solomon ruled. It's a very common number for judgment or ruling. Same idea, two sides of a coin. Well, but so are the factors here in 93. For example, 40 out of 93 leaves 53. 53 years is the number of years shy of the end of a 1050 that Abraham became mature. It also happens to be that it's really 53 and a half, so I call it 54. It also happens to be the same number of years as remaining the 70-year voting period when Noah got his covenant. Noah got his covenant 16 years into, maybe 16 and a half years into, the voting period for his epic. Okay, that was 70 years long. That means that there were 56 years remaining, or 56 and a half. Alright, so that's a really pregnant number with respect to Noah and with respect to, how the Jews got started. And that really matters because God reimburses that time at the back end. Okay, this 57 number is a double play. It plays at the beginning of the Noahic period, and as we're going to see, it plays at the end. The same thing with the 40. Okay, The 57 plays at the end right here. Okay? So he's in the boat exactly 1 year. And then, of course, the 40 also plays again right here. This is 40 days from the 93. But it also plays inside the 93. And so does the 53. 40 and 53 is 93. So there's a lot of stuff going on here with this 93. I just haven't figured out all the meaning of it yet. That's why I'm talking to you now. Okay, again, the next increment is 40, and that's the second one we've seen. You know, the first one having been up here. All right. Why God is doing it in this sequential order, I don't know. I'm just pointing out what it is. I haven't done enough work on this yet. Maybe you'll figure it out, and please tell me and save me some time. Okay, so you got a 40-year spread represented by 40 days here. Why? Why is it twice? Okay, and I was trying to figure it out. Okay, well, at 93 more days, the mountaintops are visible. Okay, but what does that mean? At the end of 150 days, the ark rests. Well, okay, what does that mean doctrinally? There is a doctrinal meaning. I just don't know what it is. Everything God does has a doctrinal meaning, even the numbers. He's trying to communicate something, and he uses numbers sometimes to do it, to make it more memorable or relevant. And he also, of course, uses the text. They're used in combination. They play off each other. Always to teach you something. It's not Bible codes, crying out loud. Okay? And it's not done to show you that God can count. We all know that. Okay, so what does it mean to say the recession was enough to make the mountaintops visible? That's what the text of 8:5 is telling us. Why? What does that mean? Well, whatever it means, it's a 93-day thing. Similarly here, 40 days later, okay, Noah sends out the raven. What does that mean? He's sending out somebody to get an answer. It's obviously a test. Obviously 40 means testing anyway. It means testing. It means ruling. Okay, but there's more to that meaning. If Noah's sending out a raven, what does that mean? I don't know. I'm just talking. So that's another 40. Okay, and then, and this gets real pregnant, we got a 7 here, a 7 here, and a 7 here. Those are 3 sevens, and they're extremely pregnant in the Mosaic Law. Okay, here's your first 7. He waits a week and sends out a dove. Now, I know what 7 means elsewhere in the Bible. I do not know what sending out a dove signifies. Okay, and the dove comes back the same day, but I made that a separate entry here. I don't know he's sending out what? A dove for what? Obviously it's a testing thing, but why a dove and what does that mean? I'm sure there's a midrash on it somewhere, but I haven't seen it. Haven't looked it up either. Okay, so here's your second 7. Okay, he sends out the dove again. And we know it's the second time because of the word another in 8:10. Because he doesn't say how many days he waited to send it out. He doesn't tell you that. Economy, Hebrew economy of speech. He sends it out again here, which means this was a week later. All right? So, what does that mean in the immediate context of what Noah's saying? Sorry. And then here's the third time he sends her out again after waiting another week, and this time she doesn't return. What's the significance about the fact that she doesn't return? Well, I think I know the answer to that, but first let me talk about this one. Okay. You will find repeated, in Hebrew meter especially, but elsewhere, explicitly, 7s. 7 is the number of promise. 7 is also the number of history. 7 is also the number of the last 7 years of history, which we see by means of Passover week, okay, and the tribulation, which, is a mirror of Passover week, okay, because Christ's tribulation has to be repaid to the world, all right? I mean, you can come up with other reasons to say the same thing, but I'm sure you all know that. Okay, So this 7, and this 7, and this, this 7, this 7, and this 7, each have a particular characteristic that is going to be later reflected, that is precedental and therefore later reflected in the Mosaic Law. So I'm not sure which of these 3 7s represents what I'm going to tell you I know about it. But here's what I know about it, okay? And you can check this and you probably know it immediately. It took 7 years to build the first temple. It took 7 years to build the second temple. Okay, first temple, 1 Kings 6. Second temple, you can look, pretty much anywhere in Haggai especially, but also Ezra 6:15, for example, talks about, the whole idea. So does Nehemiah 6:15, but that's talking about the wall. So there is this convergence of the fact that the first temple took 7 years to build. The second temple took 7 years to build. And the next convergence is, here's a 7 once, here's a 7 once, twice, here's a 7 a third time, and that is 21, and that is all over Moses' meter in Psalm 90. It's embedded kind of, like, I don't know what to call it, marbled in Isaiah 53. And it's somewhat marbled in Daniel 9. It's very pointed in Paul's Ephesians 1:3-14. So the 21, which represents the total number of years Israel was in the land from the time she returned, building the second temple, but she was only spent 7 years of that time actually building the temple. That 21 is a very prominent feature in the meter of Psalm 90. Very prominent feature in Paul's metering of Ephesians 1:3-14, and a marbled feature of Isaiah 53 and Daniel 9. Okay? That 21, okay, obviously being represented here as 3 7s, means what here? I'm not sure. Now, one of the other things it means is that there are 21 jubilees in a 1050. That's pretty important. 21 of them. Yeah, there are 21 jubilees in a 1050. And the other thing, and this is really important, maybe is the importance for the flood, there are 21 7s in a 120-year period. Doesn't quite round that way. It rounds to 119. But the next, the end of the 119, which would be the beginning of the 120, right? Beginning of the flood. That's how many are in, the 21 7s in a 120-year period. Now, the 120-year period that this is precedenting, right? 120 years warning, then the flood. That is a recurring trend in history, which I show on my past assault video. You can trace it from Adam forward, the flood being the first instance of it being used. We are in such a flood period right now, which began in March, I'm assuming it's March, of 2010, ending in, let's say, March, vernal equinox of 2130. Okay, so then it becomes kind of important, since it's relevant to us, to know what these 3 7s really signify. And I don't know. Other than what I told you, I don't know any more about it. So if you know more, I'd like to hear it. Okay? Now, this ending of the 24 is really important because, assuming that Noah was born on the equivalent of Passover, the last day of the 7 year ties to the 10th of Nisan in Exodus 12. That's the lamb set-aside date. That's the date Christ was arrested, because Israel was operating on a leap year calendar in the year that he was crucified, so she was 4 days too fast. She hadn't intercalated for the leap year. So because of that, the Passover, they instead of intercalating, they had the last day after Adar be the first day of Nisan. and therefore he's eating the Passover, and then is the Passover 4 days later when the real Passover date would have occurred. You see what I'm getting at? And I got all that from the sarcasm, the paraskue verses that are used in the Bible. There's 6 of them, 4 of which, I think 4, are in John 19. John's being very sarcastic. And even the ISBE Encyclopedia noticed that John was being sarcastic, but they couldn't figure out why. This is why. Because the calendar wasn't intercalated. That's how Christ could eat the Passover, yet be the Passover, yet rise 3.5 days later on the last day of Passover. Because it's the interplay between the scheduled official Jewish calendar Passover versus what really would have been the Passover. It's really interesting. Okay, so that precedence, I'm assuming, is here. See? It's 361 days into Noah's birthday. That's the lamb set-aside date. 4 days later, and the text in Genesis does not tell you it's 4 days later. What it does tell you is that Noah is 601 years old. If he was born on the equivalent of Passover, that's what date that would correspond to. Okay? And of course, ties to Passover exactly. Of course, that's sort of, it ties to Passover because that's my assumption to start with. It's tautological. But I submit that if you can find something better, let me know. But this sure seems to fit what God means. Okay? And again, there's a link in the video description to a book that talks about what the ancients thought about the tie to Noah. And you can maybe buy it. I'm going to be buying it. I haven't done it yet. And then you and I can argue about it or talk about it or whatever. But anyway, this is Noah's birthday, which I'm assuming is Passover. And therefore this ties to the lamb set-aside date. Now, Noah comes out, and even the BHS text says this in 8:14, Genesis 8:14. Noah comes out on the 57th day after he's been 601 years old. Okay, well, if he went in also on the 57th day after his birthday, he would have been in exactly 1 year when he leaves. Exactly. Now, it turns out that the Book of Jubilees and also Philo maintain that Noah was there exactly 1 year. And that the coming out day represents Pentecost, which, again, it would. Okay, this is what I'm coming up with as the date of Pentecost using, the priestly courses from 1 Chronicles 1:24, 1 Chronicles 24. Okay, so if it ties to Pentecost here, and he was only in a year, then, honey, that's when he went into the boat. Right here. Which is justified by the LXX text, which I maintain would be justified by the Hebrew text if they just said Eshrim rather than Esher. Anyway, that's all I know about it. If you've got other information, I'd love to hear it. And then, of course, these are notes that you can... see this thing here? This is a book I was talking about earlier. So you can access it either by the video description or by this document here. And now my computer's slowing down because when I record, it really goes into a hang. So I think what I'm going to have to do is sign off. But see that link where it says Jack Pearl Lewis? That's the guy who wrote the $129 book you can buy at Amazon. Okay, this is just sort of a journal. I'm reading the flood account. And I'll stop every once in a while when the translation looks funny. But I already know most of what this says underneath. I'm starting at Genesis 6:3. This is the announcement of the 120 years. Okay. The expression is his days for mankind from the point that God's making the announcement. A place where a lot of people get confused for no good reason, as they simply can't read English, is when it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. In other words, the days that he's talking here in the previous sentence. See, that's context. And also afterward means during the next 120 years. It doesn't mean after the flood. If it meant after the flood, it would say after the flood. Okay, a lot of stupid people look at that verse and say, oh, the Nephilim were there after the flood. No, nobody survived but Noah and his kids and their wives. Okay, his sons, 3 sons, and their 3 wives, and Noah's wife. 8 people. Alright? Not kids. There were no children other than that. Nobody else. Alright? So what this is doing is it's explaining the character of the 120 years. Alright? Why is God saying this typical Hebrew discourse? First there is an announcement, just like in Genesis 1:1. God did a thing. Okay, and then afterwards follows an explanation. Alright, of what happens after. Alright? After the announcement in this case. Alright, in Genesis 1:1, it's after God created. Duh. Because Genesis 1 is not a story of the initial creation of the earth. It's how things went wrong. Okay? This is after an announcement. God is making a decree here. Okay, so the Nephilim were on the earth at the time God makes the announcement, and also during the next 120 years. Because it's an explanation as to why things went wrong. And why they went wrong is because they were all big on themselves. Oh, we're mighty. Yeah, then the Lord saw that that was the wickedness of man. Yeah, his great mightiness was his own version of his greatness. Okay? And that's what evil is. Evil is man saying how great he is. It's the reverse of what happiness is. And it shows. Okay? Now when it says the Lord made sorry, that's nachan. It's not sorry. It's depicting a change of policy. It's using an anthropopathism. Alright? See, there it is. Nachem. Alright? And then, here's the actual Hebrew. Alright? And I'm using Twot here. It's good enough. BDB is not really much different and less explanatory in this version of Bible Works. Okay? So that's an anthropopathism. And this is closing the paragraph. In other words, he's saying here in 3, 120. The rest of it, is an explanation as to why the 120. Okay, 120. Right there. Alright? It's closing the paragraph, but it's not really I am sorry. It's an anthropopathism. This is an announcement of divine policy, reversal. Okay, but by contrast, Noah finds favor, and then it goes through the records of generations of Noah. The way this is worded here makes it look like they were triplets, and it's going to say that also, look like that also in Genesis 11, which is a restatement of the genealogy. Okay, now it's going back to the story. Okay, there's the contrast of the men being wicked, but Noah found favor right here. So now it's talking about Noah very summarily here. Typical Hebrew discourse. First you get a summary and then you get the detail. Like Genesis 2 is detail on Genesis 1. Okay, so we come back to the story. It's going to start telling it as a narration again. And again, because he's already explained it, it was corrupt. So now he's bringing in Noah because he introduced him after the summary statement. Okay, the first summary statement. End of all flesh. Okay. Make an ark. Okay. Now this is equivalent to a Liberty class ship. A Liberty class ship was a type of ship in World War II. I want to say it's about the size of 2 football fields. Okay. Very stable the way it's being depicted. Okay. So everything that all the atheists and all these other jerks are saying about the ark and how it's not possible. Oh, it's possible, all right, because we built one. All right. And Noah obviously had help, and it obviously didn't take him a whole 120 years to build the boat. All right. But he starts it out. I mean, I don't know, did he have to grow the cypress wood? Gopher wood is cypress. Cypress wood is famous for not rotting. Okay. All right. So then he's telling him the specs of the boat, which are very stable, and all the boat can do is float. It can't steer. All right. It can't go anywhere. It's a very ungainly thing, but one thing it's got going for it is it's stable. Alright? And this is where, Noah's getting his award. And what you find out when you look at Genesis 11 and some of the other things is that he's getting that award at the beginning of, okay? At the beginning of the time when he matures. So he's not getting it's will establish, okay? This is like, hi, if you do this, alright, you're going to get, because his kids are actually born 20 years after the 120 begins. Alright? And then, here's every living flesh, bring two of every kind, blah, blah, blah. Okay, animals, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So this is all a summary statement. In other words, this whole paragraph in 6 is the summary. Alright? It's in 7 where you start to get detail. 7 through the end is where you start to go chronological. Alright? 6 is the announcement of the reeve. My soul shall not strive. I should have covered that. See this word strive? That really means reeve. It's court case. It has to do with the angelic trial. That's how we know. Alright, see? Well, wait a minute. Where's reeve? It's in the, okay, it's not in that verse. That's a different courtroom verb. But, reeve is elsewhere. I'll have to find it. It's contend. Usually it's translated contend. Okay, but the point is that 6 is a summary statement. Background. Alright? So now we get into the actual chronology, which is what I want to focus on in this video. Alright. Stupid people will look at the 2 of every kind here, and 7 here, and animals that are not clean too, and then they'll look at the 2 later. You see, these are by 7s. Alright? The clean ones. Alright? When you're talking animals that are clean by 7s, it's a distinction for sacrifice. Because sacrifices were going on then. Alright? Ever since Abel. Alright? That's why there's 7 of them. And the animals that are not clean too. In other words, there are animals that were clean for sacrifice and animals that weren't. Going all the way back to Abel. Alright? And some birds, as you'll find out even later in the Mosaic Law, were clean. Alright? So when he says, look at this. You got 7 listed here, and then 2. So the whole sentence is 7, and then 2. So when you see a later reference to 2, it's just picking up at the end of the sentence. You're supposed to understand that the whole thing is meant. Alright, that's also typical discourse. To pick up at the end of the sentence or only mention the beginning of a sentence, because the sentence is well known, because it's already been mentioned in context, or it's well known to the people hearing the sentence, and they only have to pick it up at just the beginning. That you see that a lot in the New Testament, or just at the end. Well, we get it just at the end because he stated it here. This is a full rule right here. Alright? Alright. So now I want to focus on the timing here because it's really important. This is how you know God doesn't use lunar years. Alright. 7 days before the flood is going to start, he tells Noah, put him in the ark. Now, obviously, it's going to take that long. So what do you know? You know that sometime during the last 120 years, every kind of animal on the earth came to Noah. Is that a miracle? Yes. How would they know to come? They're coming from all over the world. Well, over 120 years, they're going to have the time. And it isn't necessarily going to be the same group, obvious, because animals don't live 120 years. The animal that is like in Mongolia, that starts its trek toward, roughly speaking, the Anatolia, where the boat is. I think that's approximately where it is. Mount Ararat. Roughly. I mean, I'm not sure how far the drift was. But it's somewhere in the center. Somewhere in the center in the Middle East. So if you're an animal in Mongolia and you're being supernaturally directed toward Noah, you're not going to get there in your lifetime. So what you're going to do is you're going to walk toward there. You're going to have babies. They're going to have the same urge to go there. And they're going to keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. So maybe it's like, 10th, 20th generation of the animal that finally makes it to where Noah is. So he had like this whole zoo. There were two big things that were going on during his life, three big things. He probably had to grow the cypress wood, and that takes time. He had, because he's out in the middle of nowhere, there's no water. Okay, he has all these animals coming to him. All right, and then he starts to build this boat, which probably took, it's got to be at least 2 years. Probably took 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years to build it. Depends on how much help he had. All right, to build it. But people know how to build boats in those days. This wasn't an impossible thing. But what it would have done is it would have attracted a lot of attention. So people who were, because that was an area where people traveled, they would have laughed at Noah, and they would have told their friends, and they would have told their relatives. So people all over the world were coming to see this, to laugh at it, or just because they were curious. And it took maybe, a year to 2 years that you could travel. You could travel the world in a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years. And these patterns of travel were already well established. Even Thor Heyerdahl proved how people could, basically sail along coastlines and get pretty much anywhere in the world. Okay, it was the trek on land that would be hard. All right, but he wasn't that far away from a body of water. He just wasn't in one. In other words, he might have been 200, 300, 400 miles away from a body of water. Okay, well, you can travel 200, 300, 400 miles in about a month or two. Okay, or maybe less, because it took like 4 months to travel from Persia to Jerusalem over land. All right, so this was doable, and he had 120 years. So this was the laughing stock of the world, and people came from all over the world to see it, and those that didn't come heard about it. All right, so that's what's been going on. That's the trend. Well, now in the last 7 days of it, the boat's built. Now it's time for the animals to get on board, because obviously they're not going to be on board for very long, because, that's kind of messy. All right, so it's time to get on the boat. So it's taken 7 days, last 7 days. Now, here's what I want to focus on, because God does this thing with birthdays. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came on the earth. All right? And now we're coming back to the 7 days. He's age 600 at this point. But now the Bible gets real specific. When Noah is 600 years old, in the second month of his being 600 years old, and the 17th day of the month of his being 600 years old. All right? It's measuring it by Noah's own life. Okay? And the reason why you know that is because, I'm going to use the Greek to make it easier to see it. But see, this is in the life of Noah. All right, and that's really what the Hebrew is saying here, too. Okay? It's his birthday. It's the second month following his birthday, on the 17th day of the month following his birthday, that this begins. Now, think about this. Second month, 17th day of the month. The first month was 30 days. All right? The second month is 17 more days. So that's 47 days that this happens. 47. So Noah is 600 years and 47 days old when this happens. God is accounting very specifically by his birthday. All right? So 40 days more. All right? So that's 40 days after 47. So now it's 687 days after Noah's birth day, 600th birthday. And it goes on and on. Of course, the 2s are just mentioned here because the 7s are already understood from the context. Okay, this is all summary. They entered the ark, and he's repeating the fact that everybody got in. Okay, breath of life is the proper translation here. Okay, in other words, they're breathing. You're not alive if you're not breathing. That applies to animals and people. When you're born is when your life begins. Animals and people, it's the same thing. You have to be breathing on your own before you're alive. Okay, I went through that in my Genesis videos. Okay. So now everybody, all the animals entered. 40 days again repeated. Because so you can understand this is what happened. All right. The water prevailed, increased basically, greatly. You can read that. Okay. All the high mountains everywhere are covered. Okay, 15 cubits higher. Cubit is 18 inches. Okay, there's some variation, but it's not by much. Okay, so 15 times 18. And the mountains are covered, so we're talking a bathtub here. But what I'm not sure of, but it looks like it from the way here, let me just show you. Okay? See? Cover. Hidden. Alright, rose higher than. So it looks like we're talking a bathtub here. And, if you just look into plate tectonics and Pangea, the whole story of what geology posits as Pangea, this isn't too hard to understand. I mean, even in geology, they say that the whole Earth used to be underwater. Okay, so it used to be underwater, and it broke up at some point. For all I know, their story of Pangea is actually the story of the flood. But I don't really know that. But what I'm saying is, if it was plausible geologically, it's plausible geologically here. A breakup can cause subduction, can cause a whole continent to go underwater, and it goes underwater for 2 days, 5 days, and then resurfaces. Alright? Because when it says the water prevailed for 150 days, it's possible, even geologically, that the whole Earth was a bathtub for 150 days. Okay, even the Ice Age, has something to say about that. But even the story about Pangea. But I'm not sure it actually happened that way, because it could have been that, the African continent went underwater for, it wouldn't even need to be but, 2-3 days. Because you lose, your life gets lost in 7 minutes. You can drown in 7 minutes. So it could have subducted for even 20-30 minutes, where the whole thing was underwater. 20-30 minutes, everybody would have died. And then, slowly comes back up. I don't know exactly how it happened. But it's saying that this process at least went on, or the whole Earth was a bathtub for 150 days. Could be either way, I don't know. Maybe I'll know if I study it more, but I'm just, telling you what I know now. Okay, thus he blotted out every living thing on the face of the earth. They all drowned. Blotted out means they died. And only Noah and those with him in the ark survived. Okay? Genesis 8:1, but God remembered. This remembrance is a legal term. It's remembering a contract. It doesn't mean that God forgot. It's a legal term for enacting a legal clause. Alright? And, you got the 40 days ending, so now the rain has stopped. But it's going to take time for the water to recede, so that implies a bathtub. Alright? If the water had to decrease, that implies that during this period here, the whole thing was a bathtub. So that favors the bathtub explanation. Alright, like I said, it could be either way. I'm not 100% certain, but this long explanation about receding. Okay, so now we're in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month. It started on the second month of his birthday, on the 17th. And now 5 months later, the ark is actually resting on Ararat. Okay, so we know that the ark couldn't, the recession of the water took 5 months, at least relative to his position. Whether, it took that long to recede elsewhere in the world, I don't know. But at least where he was, it took that long. Okay, and then there's another 3 months that go on. Okay, but it's not quite 3 months, because see how specific he's being? It's all relative to the birthday of Noah. Okay? Now, I'm not sure why God is being so specific here. I'm just pointing out that he is. I've got to do the math to figure out why he's doing this. Okay? So, then another 40 days passes. He opens up and he, sends out a raven to see how well the water's dried up, because if it comes back, it has no place. So that implies that the whole rest of the earth was in the same position as Ararat. So that favors the bathtub. Okay? Next, he sends out a dove, okay, which means that the raven came back. All right, it flew, it comes back, it flew, it comes back. So it's not finding a home, but it is coming back. So now he's sending out a dove, and I don't know what's the difference between a raven and a dove that he stopped using the raven. All right, that's something I have to research. The dove, however, couldn't find a resting place. All right, so the implication is that even if the raven could have found a resting place, it still would have come back to the ark. It wasn't conclusive. That's the implication I'm just drawing now. I have to research it more. See? You always got to do your homework with the Bible. You can never afford to take it at face value. You always got to investigate it. Okay? So then there's another 7 days. He sends it out again. It comes back. Another 7 days. Blah, blah, blah. All right. Now, here's what I wanted to focus on. 601st year of his life. First month. First day of the month. That's his 601st birthday. Now, the NASB doesn't translate it well, and neither does the KJV. The NIV gets this verse right. In the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year. And the reason you know that is because the Bible's telling you it's his year. It's still talking about him. All right? It's still talking about Noah. This is the LXX, and it's saying in his life. And then it's defining what month and year of his life, right? To here. All right? Did I? Yeah. Okay? So it's his 601st year on the first day of the month. That's his birthday. So Noah's 601st birthday present is the water being dried up. Okay? The water is dried up for his 601st birthday. That's a birthday present. So something ends on his birthday. All right? And then, then it takes a little longer. All right? In the second month, 27th day, the earth was dry. Now remember, back from Genesis 7, what was it? 7, blah. Okay? Right here. 7:11, 17th day of the second month of his 600th year. So he's 47 days, 600 years, 47 days old. But at this point, okay, where is it? At this point, it's 375 days later. Why? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that God timed it to end on his birthday. On Noah's 601st birthday. Why? I don't have all the answers to that either. I just know that God considered it important. And he's surely considering it important that we know. So there is something about the timing here. Why is he saying 40 days and then 7? And why is he going into all this detail about doves and ravens and another 7 days and what day this happened? Why is he doing that? It's got to mean, okay? God doesn't give you useless information, okay? It has to do something with the way God orchestrates time. I don't know what it means yet. I didn't used to understand why, Daniel 9:25 was written the way it was either. That was back in May of 2004. I just suddenly understood how to account for it with the 270s, because God was dating time from 586, 70, 70, and then the weeks began. Okay, that was then the 62 weeks and then the 49. All right, I knew that was the answer, but I didn't know why. And I also didn't know where I could find proof of it elsewhere in Scripture, but of course, this is 5 years later, and I've already posted that proof. I don't know why this is true either right now. I just know that it is. And now I'm alerted to the idea that when God goes into this much detail, okay, he's telling you something about the pattern of time. And what is it? I don't know yet. Okay? But obviously he's timing it to a birthday. So look at your own birthdays and see what happens. You might be surprised. I know I am. I have posted a more detailed version of the Pass the Salt video. You can only download the videos from the video links.
and I walk you through each 120-year period in history from Adam all the way to current, so that you could see the impact historically each time. It's pretty shocking, okay? So even if you were an atheist, you would have to say, well, how do I account for this? I mean, only a God could orchestrate time, all right? And there's certain rules that God sets up for time, and every 120 years, he's got like these deadlines of 490 or 560 years. You'll see that when you see the videos. In the last 120 years of those deadlines, certain historical trends are going to occur in order to maximize the giving out of the Bible. And, prior to the time the Bible was completed, it was giving out the Word of God as it was then revealed, and the idea was to have mass migration so people could get the Word. All right? It's a logistical issue. And Satan tries to stop that, so there's a lot of war during that period. And there's a lot of rebellion against religion during that period, because religion is usually entrenched, and, Christians, of course, there were Jews in the old days, and before that it was other kinds of religion, but religion is entrenched in any given era. And its purpose is to deflect your attention from God and focus it instead on how good you are. All right, religion was invented by Satan in Genesis 3. So this whole religious thing is really the essence of the sin nature. How good am I? I'm too good. I'm good enough. I'm good as God. I don't deserve to go to hell. Blah, blah, blah. You hear everybody say that all the time. That was the same argument that was made at the fall. All right, so this religious trend of history is very demonic. It's very contagious, and it kills the human race. So, for the atheist, I want you to just examine this. Examine the fact that history ties to these 120-year periods. Go look up any history on the internet or anywhere else you want, because I post the BC and AD dates, so you can empirically test this. And start asking yourself some questions. I'm not in the proselytizing business. You believe that God exists or you don't, that's your business. Okay? There's no way that any Christian is going to be able to prove God to you, because the way God gives his proof is internal, and he takes intimate details in your own life that only you know, and he adds them up. So you have to ask God how to connect the dots in your own life so you can see that he's been acting in it. And he is acting in it because he personally gave you your soul at birth and your first breath. What technically happens is pattern of Genesis 2:6. The fetus that would become your body exited the womb of your mother. And then at that very moment, God breathed into your nostrils a soul he created that's just for you. He personally did this, and he gave you your first breath. It's an inhale. And that's why you can ask any OBGYN, the first thing that they do in a delivery room is they unplug the nostrils, because the fetus doesn't have any independent breath in the womb. They unplug the nostrils, and the fetus, the baby now, it's now a baby, exhales. That was a gift of God personally to you. He wanted your existence and made you. Now after that, it's up to you whether you want him, but he wanted you. So it's a worthy claim. It's worth investigating, and the way he proves it is through this intimacy thing. So you have to sort of ask the ceiling, okay, God, it doesn't look like you exist, or what I see about you through these stupid Christians doesn't look like it's a very nice God. I need better proof. And then ask for him to connect the dots, because he's already been working in your life. Now, that's as close to a sales pitch as you're going to get from me, because all I can do is just tell you what it is. Whether you like it or not, or deal with it or not, is your private affair between you and God. You don't even believe he exists yet. That's fine. That's for you to work out. The other thing I need to make you know, and that's why I'm doing this video, is that the 120 years that's going to start next year is going to be horrible. Okay? It is always characterized by war. Think of the flood. Okay? What the Bible says about the flood, but you can also look at the period. The flood happened 2540 BC, according to the Bible. I'm not using any outside sources. So you back out to 120 years prior to that, and you can look in history about what it was like. It was all about man, how proud he was of himself. Okay, oh, power, might makes right, and everybody fighting with everybody else. And, they call those the glory days. Well, yeah, if you think war is glorious, it was a time when everybody was beating up on each other, and your wife loved you if you were smart enough or rich enough. Okay, she didn't really love you for yourself. Okay, and people only liked you so long as you were nice, or so long as you did for them. It was you do for me, I do for you. Build up to a peak. Okay, that's what life is like now too, and we're entering into a peak. Okay, everybody's all about what can you do for me. All right, there's no real love in the world. And there was no real love back then either. And this tit-for-tat business, which is the essence of the sin nature, because it's all religious, okay, even if it says there's no God, religious is tit-for-tat, all right, that is the essence of depravity. It's not a depravity of will, it's a depravity of information. Okay, so what we're walking into here are going to be the worst 120 years of history since the Reformation. You know how bad the Reformation was. So as an atheist, and this is as close to a sales pitch as I can give it, first of all, in order to be saved, whether you like it or not, I'm just giving you the information. Just make sure you remember it, even if you hate it, so you know what it is. Believe that Jesus Christ paid for your sins and you're forever saved. You only have to do it once in your lifetime. And a lot of you atheists are actually former Christians, so you're already going to heaven whether you like it or not. Okay? But if you've never done that, do it now and then go back to hating God again or go back to being an atheist again. All right? That way you'll be sure to go to heaven, because there's going to be a lot of death. What God does is he cleans house during this 120 years. It's just like the flood idea. Okay, he cleans house. A lot of believers who have been successful in the spiritual life are now going to go home, because blessing to the world goes through the believers. So by taking out the believers, Satan gets a freer hand in messing with us. And so that's an angelic trial thing. So a lot of believers who are successful in the spiritual life start to go home in unusual numbers. And then the crappy believers, which is 99% of us, start getting killed off too. Because the idea is to free up the world so it's free of the contagion of bad thinking. And religious people among Christians are the worst. Okay? So a lot of us are going to die. For all I know, I'm going to be one of them. All right? Within the next, I want to say, 3-4 years. Okay? Next 3-4 years is when God really steps up the cleaning of the house. All right? So make sure you know the gospel is believe that Jesus Christ paid for your sins and you're forever saved. If you ever did that in the past, you're already saved. You don't have to worry about it. If you're not sure that you've done it in the past, do it right now and then go back to being an atheist again. Okay? Now, that's that part. The second thing I need you to know is that if you decide you're not going to believe now, and that's between God and you, don't tell me or anybody else, it's nobody else's business, then you better be damn sure of your premises. Because when this thing starts to heat up like it's done, so many times in the past, all right, about every 500 years this thing goes on, you better be damn sure you know what you're auditing, what you believe. And the same thing goes for you Christians and you guys of other religions, whatever you are. Be damn sure that you can prove why what you believe is true and why some other alternative to that belief that competes is false. Be sure you can account for it. Be sure you audit it. Because you know what? If you're wrong, you're going to get swept up in the violence that's to come. Okay? It doesn't matter that it's your best friend who believes the same thing, or your family, or you grew up in it. Okay? They didn't make your soul. They are not responsible for your decisions. You can't blame it on a teacher or anything else. If you're Catholic, if you're Calvinist, if you're Baptist, if you're SDA, if you're this or that, or whatever your denomination of Christianity, or you're Baha'i, or you're, whatever you are in the non-Christian religions, make sure you know why. That way, if you go down in flames, you know you did your homework. But wouldn't the worst of all things be to die and know you didn't do your homework? So the playlists that I have on my channel span other perspectives that violently disagree with mine. Alright? So, you're welcome to look at those playlists. But whether you look at any stuff that I do or anything on my channel or not, make sure you audit your beliefs. Be very sure what you believe, because it's going to be tested for the rest of your life now. Ta-ta. It's true for me too, by the way. I'm scared to death. This is a follow-up video to the Pass the Salt, because people's eyes glaze over when they look at worksheets, and the worksheets weren't as clear in that video, which was just an introduction. I'm going to walk you through the 120 from Adam forward so you can see its significance. And that way, when you go to look at the actual worksheet and the web pages, your eyes won't glaze over so much, I hope. Okay, here's how it works. This is Adam's fall up here in row 13. It was the year 4106 BC, which you figure out by backing into it. I show the mechanics of how I derived that date in my brainoutfact.htm item number 6, which will be a link posted in the video description. That way you can see how all the dates were derived. It's strictly from the Bible verses. It does not use the stupid idea of astronomy or astrology or extra biblical material. Okay, you use that stuff. I wouldn't even ever use astronomy, but you use extra biblical material after you first learn what the Bible says. And all these dates are solely derived from what the Bible says. Okay, that means that you yourself can proof them in the Bible, and like right here with Genesis 5. Okay, but you'd be best off looking at that brainoutfact.htm number 6, because you sort of have to start at a later person and then backtrack to Adam to get the right date, and I show how I did that. Okay, so much for that part. Now we're at 560 years after the fall at this point, and the 120 years is always measured from an included voting period, but the way God orchestrates time is intercalated, just like the Jews intercalated between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. This essential idea of two different calendars balancing to each other is what God follows for the rules of time itself. Okay, and the 120 in this particular instance, in all the odd 490s. This is the first one, so it'll be the first one, the third one, the fifth one, the seventh one. All the odd 490s have an immediate 70-year voting period following them. And Moses actually crafts Psalm 90's meter based on those 70-year voting windows, because he's tracking to the scheduled death at that time, the scheduled death of Christ in 37 A.D. That was scheduled. He actually died 7 years earlier for reasons I explained on the webpage. But the point is this is a 7-year voting window already included. And so when God's going to announce the 120, which you're going to see in a few minutes, the 120 always includes whatever voting window is normal. Okay? So we got a normal voting window here of 70 years. So to get the 120, you got to count 120 years backwards of the end of the 7-year voting window. Okay, so 560 minus 120 is what? 430, 440, I think it is. I'm very tired, so I can't do my math very well right now. 440. So from the year 440 from Adam to the year 560 from Adam, there was a voting window for whether people wanted the Word. And unbelievers could vote for the Word by voting to believe. Okay? Genesis 15:6 is the pattern at all times, believing in Christ as he was then revealed. Okay, so that's the first window, is 120 years from then. Now, I don't have plotted here like I do for the other windows, historical events. I just haven't had time to do that. But here's the time period that we're looking at. We're looking at 4106, okay, to what? Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. 3546 minus 4106 is 560, so 560 minus 4106, okay, 3546 BC. So from 4106 to 3546 BC, you can look that up on the internet to find out what happened. All right, and therefore you can take 3546, and then back it out to 120 years prior, and the historical period you're looking at is 3666 to 3546 BC. You can look that up on the internet and figure out what happened and whether or not the 7 historical trends I talked about in the video were met. Okay, you'll find out that they are, but that's for you to find out. Okay, that's the first voting period. The second voting period in history, okay, ends right here because the 490 ends in the same year. Okay, but the structure is 490 plus 70 plus 490. That's why it totals 1050. So now the voting period that's included in the 120 is the 50 years for unbelievers to vote to be saved. Okay, and that was represented later in the Mosaic Law by means of the rule of Jubilee. Jubilee was supposed to be the last 50 years of history, representing the harvesting of the Gentiles. And it was also represented by Pentecost, counting of the Omer, which is also a harvesting concept. I think the Judaic term today still is harvesting the Gentiles, but they might have other terms. Okay, so look. You count 120 years back from 1050. So it's 1050 minus 120 is 930 from Adam. And then again, you know, you can take that, let's just do it here. 930 minus 4106. I don't think I did that right. Wait a minute. Yeah. So we take 4106 minus 930, that's the equivalent BC period. Okay, 3176. Okay, so it's 3176. Okay, minus 120. 3176 to 3056 would be the period you can investigate on your own. I didn't post any of the historical events for that period here, so I didn't cover it in the video. Okay, but you can find them. All right. Now, the reason I didn't is because I only have so much time. This is supposed to be a hobby, and it's turning rapidly into something that's eating my life. So, you know, I have to do secular stuff too, so I don't have enough time yet to post the events, but you can post them. Or you can at least, you know, register them and find out what they are. Now we start to come into this thing here. You'll notice that the 490 ends, the next one, the third one, the odd one, ends in 1540, and that its 70-year voting period ends in 1610. Okay, so then you take 1610 minus 120, and you get the 1490th year from Adam, which is 20 years later than that, so it'd be 2656 BC. Okay, that runs until, you know, 2496 BC. All right, so that's the period in question. 2656, which is 20 years later than this, to 2496. Now, the thing that makes that important is that you'll notice that just before the 490 occurs, God announces, this is Genesis 620 years, God announces that the world's only got 120 years left. Notice how he's taking into account, this is a big key to how I learned this, he's taking into account the 70-year voting window, and Moses tracks this voting window also. It's the second voting window he tracks in the meter of Psalm 90. So he's tracking the 70-year voting window, and then he's tacking on an additional 50 years. This is the year of the flood, which is our equivalent to our 2450 BC. So when he makes this announcement here of the 120 years, he's including the voting window there. He does this a lot. You're going to see more of this as we go on. So that's how you know how the 120 works. It always includes some current voting window. Like we saw here, you're going to date the 120 backwards from 1050. And here we're dating it forwards, in this particular case from his announcement. But normally you'd be dating it forward from the beginning of the 70-year voting period and then adding another 50 years after that. Okay, for the odd-numbered 490s. Okay, so now we go to our next voting period, and this one is a 50-year voting window. The 490 ends here at 2100 from Adam, so we're going to back it like this. 2100 minus 120 is 1980 is when the voting window starts in terms of years from Adam. Okay, so that's 2006 BC, all right, at the end point, and then you'd be backing that out. All right, wait a minute. You'd be backing that out, 2006 minus, well, wait a minute, 0. I gotta add a plus here. So from 2126 to 2006 BC is our next voting window. Now here we begin to see easily that there's a rather important thing going on during this voting window. Abraham is born in 1946. Okay, and we just saw, all right, he's born 1946 from Adam. In terms of BC, he was born 2160. So look at this, okay? 2006 BC is our end point. And then our beginning point was 2126. So Abraham is born during the voting window. And of course, we know how Abraham votes. This signifies that he's super mature. That's why he's in light blue. And he got a 490 at the same time, because you get personal 490s also. That's what allows time to continue. In the very year that Noah's personal 490 award expires. Okay, so it's real important that Abraham was born during the voting window, the 120-year voting window ending 2100 from Adam. And of course, this is an unbeliever voting window. It's 50 years long. All right, but you see how the 120 works, and now you see a particular significance you can actually trace. Abraham is born during the voting period, and he votes. We know how he votes. He got a covenant. The Jews come from Abraham. There wouldn't have been a world if there hadn't been an Abraham. Okay, because he's to be the blessing to the world. We all know that from Genesis 12, 15, 17, etc. Okay, so now we come to our next voting window, and that ends right here, because see, it's an odd number. It's the 5th from Adam. Okay, so that ends in 2660, which is 1446 BC. So you add 120 years to that. So it covers in our BC AD terms 1566 to 1446 BC. See that? All right? That's the 120 years, okay? So what happened during that time? All right? We got, in terms of Adam years, because that's the way the Bible tracks it, 2540. Okay, so we come back up here a little bit, and notice 2540, we're coming into the time of our dear boy, Amenhotep. You know, this is the 18th dynasty. We're coming into Moses' time. Moses is born during the voting period. Abraham was born during the last voting period. Moses is born during this voting period. And Moses votes. And that's why you have an Exodus. Okay? So again, we see an importance to this 120-year voting period if we just follow the rules. Okay? And it's the same rules for the flood. So we know that destruction or the world going on living is the criterion. And somebody, it was Noah, then it was Abraham, and now it's Moses, has to be developed in order for time to continue. Now we come to the most important voting window of all, pre-cross. And that is the voting window that ends 3150. I didn't have time to cover this in the video, and I just want you to see that all the 120-year periods are important, not just the ones I picked in the video. So here you got 3150, okay, which is 956 BC, all right, minus 120, which is 3030 in terms of Adam years, okay, 3030. Remember that. In terms of what is it? BCAD, 956 plus 120 is 1076 BC, okay, to 956. So now looky here, 3030. First of all, Abraham's personal 1,000-year award, which I cover in my web pages, so I'm not going to cover it here, ended 10 years after the window started. And another 10 years after the window started, Israel rejects God. So they're voting no. The world should have ended at that time. That's why I've got this colored in gray, just like I did the flood. Okay, the world should have ended. But there were enough votes to still continue the world, because God announces, okay, I'll give you a human king. If there weren't enough votes to at least get a human king, because they were positive to a human king, then the world would have ended. They were positive only to the extent that they could have a human king. In other words, that was the condition they were giving God. Now, God already, of course, foreknows that David is going to be born. He wasn't born then. Okay, look at, all right. David is born in 3066, 10 years later. All right. But God foreknows that, and God foreknows that there's enough vote, people were positive if there was a human king, so he promises one, and of course the first one is Saul, same year. And of course Saul was initially positive himself, but then he goes negative. So that means the rise of David. Okay? So notice how all of this is occurring in the 120 years ending 3150. All right? So from 1076 BC to 956 BC, the most important event in history, the formation of the kingship, because Messiah comes from David, that's what happens during this 120 years. Are you noticing a pattern? Okay? So now let's go to the next one, and of course this is momentous also. This is when, you have all the kings. But here we come into another, and I can't show it all on screen. The 120, well, let me show where it actually begins. Okay. The next 120-year period ends at 3710. So 3710 minus 120 is 3590. All right? 3710 to 3590. Okay, now 3590 is right here. Could God advertise the 120 being important, or what? The temple. Remember when the temple went down 120 years, okay, before the 490 ended. Okay, 120 years before the 490 ended, the temple was destroyed. That should have destroyed the world too, because Israel is the blessing to the nations. That's Deuteronomy 32:8. All right, the nations are based on. All right, because Messiah is going to come from Israel. That's the reason for it. It's not because of the Jews. It's themselves. It's because of God giving His word to them. All right, so 3710 minus 120 is when the temple got done. And 3640 minus 120 is when the temple was first destroyed. Now remember how God said that for 70 years the temple will be out. And after 70 years he would restore them. Yeah, right here. And now you see why he picked, why did he pick 7 years? Why didn't he pick 50 or 100 or 40 or 30? Because he's timing everything to the voting periods, just like Moses does in Psalm 90, and just as you can see history beginning to do. You see, God's scheduling it. The temple had to be complete by the 70 years, and it was. That was the promise. 516 AD is 3590 from Adam, and that is 120 years, so now we got the voting period reinstated. As long as the temple is out, people can't vote, because there's no nation with the faith that you can go vote with your feet and get the Bible as it was then revealed, orally or in writing at that point. You got to have a temple around. That was the promise in, 1 Kings 9. All right, so long as the temple is standing, then it's a blessing to the world. Well, now the temple is standing again, so the 120 can kick off, and that's why it dies here 70 years prior, and that's why God says 70 years. He's timing it. He's making a promise based on the voting period, and of course Satan was trying to, stop it. As you can see, it didn't work.
But you see how the 120 works now? 3710 minus 120 is 516 AD. Okay, so it's 396, just after Scripture was completed. All right, that was another part of the promise. That's in Daniel 9:25. It's part of it. That's what the 49 is about. So 3710 from 120 is 3590 when the temple will be completed. And that's why there are two 70s built into the timing of Daniel 9:25. And Daniel 9:25 is just copying the terms, the metered terms. You won't see them in words, they're metered, that Moses and then Isaiah 53 uses. Moses used it in Psalm 90, Isaiah used it in Isaiah 53, and I walk you through the meters so you can see it. So 120 minus 70, okay, was the beginning of the voting period. All right, but minus 50 is the temple. So that 120 is really pretty bald. And it's also 120 years from the end of the 490 itself to the time when the temple was destroyed. So God's playing with this. He's timing things to a schedule. It's very obvious. All right, and instead of it being Abraham or Moses or Noah this time who saves the day, it's the temple being built, and it's Jerusalem being built in time. Satan tried to destroy it here, and God had made a promise that spanned the two 70s. From here to here is 70 years, okay? And then from here to here is 70 years. And that's exactly how the accounting works in Daniel 9. And why the scholars didn't pick up on it, I don't know. But I documented it, and you can vet it yourself in mirroring.htm. Okay, so here we go. That's the end of that voting period. So the next voting period, of course, is the voting period for Christ. All right? We have a lot of satanic attempts to stop that from occurring. Hanukkah is going to be his birthday, which is, predicated on Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, trying to desecrate the temple, and of course it doesn't work. And they get the temple back. Israel becomes a nation again in 141 BC. And here we go. Let's see if I can get that. I can't get that. I can't get that. There we go. All right. Now Christ is born in 4136 from Adam, and I sort of have to scroll past him so you see when the time should have ended. The time should have ended 4200. This is the end point in the prophetical accounting that Moses uses when he's tracking the voting periods, and that Isaiah uses in Isaiah 53. Both of them are tracking to this end point, and then they determine their meter by backing out 57 years, 50 years represented by Jubilee, harvesting of the Gentiles, 7 years representing by the reimbursement of Passion Week, which is the tribulation, and I explain all this in my mirroring.htm. They backed that out. So that was predicted ever since Moses. Okay? The thing was, though, is that he was scheduled to die on the 1000th anniversary of David's death. All right? And they knew about that because they were always backing out 57 years. Look, it's 57 years from here to here. And Moses backs that out in the first 4 verses of Psalm 90, and then Isaiah plays on that in Isaiah 93, splits it. And I explained how that worked out in those 2 video playlists. So this particular end, the 120 years, ends in 4200, had Christ not died. All right? So 120 years prior to that is 4200 minus 120 is 4080. Okay, well, look at this. When does Christ come? He comes in 4103. So he is arriving, born, based on the 1000th anniversary of David's crowning, because Christ is going to be born king. So this is the 1000th anniversary of David's being crowned king over all Israel in late 1004 BC, probably on what we call Hanukkah of 1004 BC, but I can't quite prove that was the date of his crowning. I'm still trying to figure that out. But it was the right year. The 1000th anniversary, you have to call it 3 BC in the accounting, but it was really 25 Kislev 4 BC. The 25 Kislev comes from Haggai 2. I explain that in passplot.htm. You can read it there. But see, 4103 is within the voting window because, again, 4200, Sorry for all this number crunching. I hope your eyes haven't glazed over. 4200 is the end point. 4080 is the beginning point. Okay? And Christ is born about 50 years in. Well, not even. Let's see. 4080 minus 4103. He's born 23 years into the voting period. And, of course, everybody has to vote on him. You see the parallel? And the world would have ended if he didn't die on the cross. That's pretty patent. If he had failed. Now, Israel was supposed to accept him, and if they would have accepted him, he wouldn't have died in 30 A.D. He died in 30 A.D. because that's the year that they, conspired against him to get him crucified. But he was scheduled to die anyway in 37 A.D., which was already predicted by the 57 years in the Mosaic Law, and also turned out, of course, way post-Mosaic Law, to be the 1000th anniversary of David's death. That was the end point in Daniel 9:25, 26 rather. That was the end point in Isaiah 53 that he backs into to get his number of syllables. That's the end point in Psalm 90 that Moses used to get his syllables, and I documented the math of that in the video playlist for Isaiah 53, Meter Hypothesis, and Psalm 90. So, if your eyes haven't glazed over already, you can vet all this. I provided the information. Whether you agree with it or not is between God and you. All right, so that takes you, that shows you what I didn't show in the video, all the 120-year periods and how they get calculated. Okay? I don't show the 50-year voting period here because Christ resets time. When he dies on time, here, he dies on the 1000th anniversary of David's retirement from kingship. The scholars always misdate David. They base his death on Josephus, but the Bible says in 1 Kings 6:1 that he died 7 years later. And since scholars misread that verse, they don't know this. Okay? And I explained that in Mirroring.htm. But Christ is dying on the 1000th anniversary of David's retirement from kingship. It's also the 1470th anniversary, which is 490 times 3, of the original Exodus. The original Passover. Okay? So God is doing this on purpose. He's obviously timing. And it's within the 120-year voting window. In fact, it's within the 120-year voting window. And then the 50-year voting window that was represented by Jubilee in the law starts in 4150, 44 A.D., That's when Paul gets converted. Very interesting. So Paul votes during the 50 years. He was an unbeliever who voted, see? And it ends in 4200. Now that was when the millennium was supposed to begin, according to the schedule given the Jews. But they rejected Christ, so everything resets to 30 AD. That's the same as year 0 for Adam. Alright, so now we measure our 490s from 30 AD. So the first one, the first 490, is right here in 520. But there's a 70-year voting period that I didn't quite mark as well as I could have right in here. Alright, so between here, row 217, and here, row 209, is a 70-year voting period. So now we're going to back the 120 from that. So we'll just use BC AD. That's now 590 AD, and this I covered in the video. 590 minus 120 is 470, and I covered that in the video. So now look, alright, look at all the activity, because I didn't cover this in the video. Jerome starts his translation of the Bible, which the Vatican will end up deep sixing. He tried to modernize the translation in 386 AD. Alright. Some people he gave copies to, but then when the Vatican found out about it, they deep sixed it, and it didn't become the Vulgate, the official accepted version, until 800 AD or so. You can find that out in Christopher DeHamel's The Bible, and probably other sources. Okay, but look at the evangelism that got started. St. Patrick started in 389. Alright, that's all set up. Okay? You got the sack by Alaric that caused mass migration. Alright, you got Clovis coming along, him and his, the Merovingians coming along within, from 470 to the end here, 490. And what that did, and people don't pay enough attention to it, the advent of Clovis was part of a whole trend that you can view in history of nation states. What we now call the modern nation state basically began here, and it began because people were trying to find an alternative to Catholic power. All right? Clovis was one of those guys. I mean, yeah, he gave lip service and everything to the church, but really he ruled himself. You know, he was just trying to be nice in order to, you know, keep them from attacking him. Okay, but he was his own man. Clovis and the Merovingians, they were a bunch of putzes too, but, you know, they were their own nation. And so he was real shrewd to do that. You know, kind of like, was Constantine, you know, which happens up here. This was also set up to the 470-year migration period. Okay, they kidnapped Bible manuscripts, they monopolized Christianity, but at the same time they preserved manuscripts during this time. See, you got monasticism rising. You know, a lot of the monks, they were monks so that they could sort of do their own thing and yet seem like they're, you know, Catholic. Monasticism was a way to rebel. It was also a way to get to read Bible, since they cracked down on the Bible manuscripts, so you had to become a monk or a nun in order to be able to read the Bible. Okay, and a lot of these copies got made, and this way they could learn the Bible and copy it at the same time. So a lot of the people who are monks were really quietly rebelling. But, you know, if you want to just plain learn Bible, you don't want to make an issue of yourself rebelling. You don't want to make an issue of how bad the Catholic Church is. You just want to learn the Bible. And that's what they did. Okay? And there's a whole bunch of you know, official back to the Bible movements that were going against the Catholic Church during 312. You know, this whole thing is a period of ferment. Okay? And it's a period of ferment because they got to have Bible available to people. You got migration starting in 370. Again, Jerome. Again, the evangelists. All those things are set up for the official period because it's going to reach a peak from 470 to 590. All right? You know, you got the Arian heresy arising during the period. Now, think about this for a minute. You couldn't have large masses of breakaway movements. It doesn't matter that their ideas were goofy. There would be no way to have large mass breakaway movements if they didn't have access to Scripture. You know, they've got to have something to base it on. Even if the way they're reading the Bible is wrong, they got to have a Bible to read to make their claims. So you know that Bible was available if you could have the Arian heresy be so widespread. I mean, you know, that was what the Catholic Church was fighting against a lot during that time. And it wasn't just them. I haven't plotted all the events, but you can look that up yourself. But see, 470-590 was a pretty fermenting time. You got Columban going on here. You got all kinds of monasteries flourishing here. And again, that was a secret way to rebel without getting in trouble, where you could just read the Bible because that was what you really wanted. Okay? So that's how that period ends. And I covered the period, but I didn't cover any details. So now, as you notice, things start to step up, and we now got Muhammad in the mix. All right, because it didn't quite work. You know, we had too many missionaries and we had too many monks, okay, and so much so that you could have the Arians and all the other weirdo groups that broke out during this time. You had the competition of nation states. Satan was having problems getting Christians to really rebel against the word. Okay, so now he has to get this guy Muhammad to go attack the Christians, so that they'll be busy fighting Muhammad instead of reading their Bible. That was basically the idea. And he even timed it to the 490s, but I'm not going to go into that here. I cover that in my How Satan Deploys Islam videos. Okay, so now we're coming into our next one. As you can see, you know, we got the Temple, the Roman Byzantium Wars, Muhammad in the mix now. The Benedictines, they were rebelling against the Catholic Church. But they were still calling themselves Catholic. That's how you did it. You know, they were trying to reform the system from within. You know, the crackdown on Codex Amiatinus. All right, it was secretly made and distributed, and then, you know, they tried to capture copies of it and were really ticked off in the Roman Catholic Church. Then you have, you know, all the infighting with the Muslims, again, to try to fragment us. And then you have this. Okay, Charlemagne. Charlemagne was really interested in the Bible, and he was also a jerk. Both things were true at the same time. He made real severe efforts to get collections of Bible manuscripts and stuff. He was, nodding to the Catholic Church in order not to war with them, but he was his own man, just like Clovis was. And, of course, his sons after that sort of, broke apart. But Bible got solidified here. People were able to get copies of Bibles due to this guy. Okay, so of course now Islam has to try to invade Europe so they can get at, Charlemagne's people. Alright, that didn't work too well. And then all these invasions and migrations help people find out about the Bible. And of course, again, you've got Codex Amiatinus. Even if they nod to it, that's what it's for. Alright? They wanted to have secular nation states. That's why you had the Merovingians, which, Clovis started that. Alright? And all the while, you've got migrations, you've got Bible being collected, you have this guy who's, a king who's trying to get Bible. It was Constantine first, and then it was Clovis, and now it's Charlemagne. Okay? Kings who became interested in the collection of the Bible. Okay, so that takes us to 1080, and this 120 is really pretty, bald. And I mean, Satan was so ticked off about his lack of success, he has to have Jerusalem be taken in 1073. Alright? Now, the Millennium was supposed to start in 94 AD, so it was supposed to end in 1094 AD. So there's a little bit of a joke going on here. Okay? The Crusades start in 1096. Again, if he wasn't getting success due to Islam, then he's got to try and get the Christians involved fighting Islam, and that's what this is. Go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, let's look at the relics rather than the real relic, the Bible, which too many people were interested in. I mean, even the monks were rebelling, the Clunies in particular. Okay? So that 120-year period is really obviously important. Okay, now we come into the next one, which, every school child knows this one. Alright? But they don't understand that it's, measured. See, 1640. 120 years prior to that, which I was covering in the videos, is 1520. That's when Suleiman the Magnificent comes to power. Yeah, Satan's got to roll out the Muslims, because why? Because Luther posted his theses. And how was Luther able to post his theses within the 120 years ending in 1640? Well, because Gutenberg, baby, here, made the first movable type Bible, so now you don't have to rely on the monks copying. Now you can get a printable copy that made it much cheaper. That means you could get much more out of them done faster, so that more people can have Bibles. And look at all this mass evangelization that occurs in the same year. Okay? And of course, Constantinople has to be overrun by the Muslims in order to try to deflect attention from it. You got the Spanish Inquisition to try to deflect attention from the Bible. See, all those trends that I said were true in the video, you can see them illustrated here. I didn't put in as much data as I should, but you can still see it. Then there was this big collation of the original language manuscripts that began about 1514. Of course, the Muslims like to claim a lot of credit for the, sort of mini Renaissance that took place, the, pre-Renaissance. But really, it was people who wanted to know the material. So knowing the original language manuscripts was very important at that point, because now we can get them printed. See? You don't have to just have the Vulgate printed. You can have the original language manuscripts printed. And there were a lot of them available. Okay, and in fact, that culminated in our dear boy Erasmus making the Textus Receptus. Alright, now that was the final collation of it. He basically began it about, I forget, I want to say 1560 or 1540 something. It's in my Erasmus video in my KGV Only Blasphemy playlist. And I forget the year right now. But, see, look at everybody's collating manuscripts in the 1500s. They're finding them, they're collating them. Okay, the Reformation begins, I think it really begins in 1540 according to the history books. But, you can argue it began really here, and in earnest here, because that was 3 years after Luther posted his theses. But you pick the year you want. The point is that it's 120 years. It's the window starts here to here, and you have all this setup, just like we have this setup that we've been going through the last 50 years to get into our current situation, which I'm going to cover next. Say 1450 to 1520, that's 70 years of setup. And you got the Inquisition, you got activity of getting Bible, you got all that deployment of the Muslims, and of course that didn't stop the Reformation, which meant everybody, well, not everybody, but a whole lot of people who couldn't have the Bible before now could suddenly have it. The common man can finally get a Bible and then pass it down to his kids. All right? A whole Bible. Because for thousands of years, man couldn't even get a whole Bible. All right, so now we come into our period, and it should be easy to understand that we're just a continuation of the same trend. 2130 is when our period ends. Okay, so 2130 minus 120 is 2010, like I said in the video. I don't have that year plotted here, but look at what's been happening in the last 120 years. Our biggest finds, our best finds of the Bible started about here. Okay? In the middle 1800s, you had Catholics who basically rebelled against the Catholic Church. One of the most famous being Tregellus. He went against the Vatican's rules, and the Vatican allowed him to look at their manuscript, and what he did was memorize it and write it down at night when he went home. He wasn't allowed to touch it. Okay, he was only allowed to look at it, and so he stood over it for, I don't know what, 10, 12 hours a day, memorized it, went home, wrote it, went back the next day and looked at the next page or next couple of pages or whatever. And so that forced the Vatican to publish one of our best Bible manuscripts. And you can prove that it's the best if you can read the Greek. Stupid people like Ripplinger and the KJV only people cannot read the Greek, so they can't tell if it's any good. So they just lie and tell you that it's corrupt. They don't know how to read it, so they don't know what corrupt looks like. All right? But during this period, baby, we got grammars, we got all kinds of information. A lot of people could speak Greek and read the Hebrew during this time. It was something that a gentleman was expected to do. And then you got the Zionist movement going on. You got the counterfeit of Joseph Smith, because, it's no longer enough to use the Muslims. Okay, you've got now all of a sudden Darwinism, the precursor of Darwinism, and Darwinism itself going on. You do have, the Ottomans allowing Jews to purchase land in Palestine to try and deflect attention to get us to rebuild the temple and rebuild Israel, so they'll all be in one place for easy killing. I don't know why people don't figure that out. The diaspora is to protect the Jews. But as long as Israel's there, let's fight for her with our very lives. I'd gladly die for Israel any day. Okay, but the Zionist movement begins here. Why? Because the Ottoman was selling land. It got the money. It didn't care if the Jews occupied the land. All right? And all that, of course, is producing ferment. Lots of migration, Bible research, and you know what the migration looked like during this period. And then, of course, you have the world wars that occur. All right? You have World War I. You had the 1870, all those wars in Europe before that. Okay? You have the rise of anti-Semitism, of course, because that motivates people to go to Israel and herd themselves. All right? And so that all produced World War I and II, and the pogroms, again, in order to motivate the Jews to herd in Israel. And if he couldn't get them to herd in Israel, he was going to try to kill them everywhere they were. And it's a lot harder to kill Jews when they're all over the world. So this was a way to try to do that. Didn't work. Ha! God protects his people. So Israel's born as a state in 1948. Okay? Russia breaks up. You got the internet. So now the Bible's on the internet. Okay? The Middle East is now freed up due to George Bush's policy, which is one of the most brilliant things on the planet. History in 100 years or less is going to show how brilliant George W. Bush was. Okay? And that all leads into our window. And 2010 is when the window opens. So all this prior, okay? I mean, look. 2010 minus, we'll say 70. Whoops, I did it wrong. 2010 minus 70. 1940, just before World War II. Everything was a setup. And notice how it's a peak. The peaks are all higher. The interest in the Bible in the United States and in Europe really increased. We had a lot of wars to go with that. War always accompanies a rise of interest in Bible because Satan's trying to kill people off so they can't be around to be interested. All right, whenever you start getting interested in God, you're going to find that your temptations are higher than they used to be. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. The more you care about God, the worse your life gets. Always. Even if you have money or you have health, you'll have other problems. They'll make your life worse. Okay? And that's exactly what happens here. Interest in Bible starts to peak. That's why we're collecting the manuscripts. Okay, well, the wars peak too. Just look at the period of the 19th century. War, ferment, arguing, everybody running everywhere else, all these inventions that make life easier so we can travel farther and be, distracted from the Bible. Get that? All right, so that period ends 2130. I hope I help you understand how the 120 works. And, we got a voting window here that's 50 years. And so that's why we're measuring from here. And I hope you understand it better. And I hope, above all, that you, whatever you believe, audit it. Be sure that you can justify what you believe and how you can prove any counter ideas wrong. Because you're going to be voting on it. And your vote will determine the quality of your life.
Okay, I'm beginning to record now. I don't know if the air conditioning in the background is making a lot of noise or what. But as you'll notice, I'm using an avatar rather than my face because I'm sick to death of trying to get the lighting right in my room because my camera only has two settings, Dragon, Lady, and Princess. And I don't look anything like the camera. But anyway, getting to the point, down in the video description, I have now compiled a list of Bible Hebrew meter time poem characteristics. There are 30 of them. And you can use them on any Bible passage you want. And it even tells you how to diagnose whether a Bible passage might be a time poem. There are certain style characteristics you can detect in translation. So, if you look down in the video description, you will find them. So look at the video description and see.